The Sikha we will learn now will be from Sichas Chelik Yutches, the second Sikha to Parshas Matos. The Rebbe starts like this: in der Parsha, wo Eden seinen Stave geworden, of the Dinim von Nagolas Klein Midian. In this week's Parsha, we learn that the Torah commanded, the Eden were commanded to do the din of Hagolah. Hagolah means kasher and kelim. If the kelim is straight, there are dinim how to kasher the kelim. So when they had the war with Midian, when they brought back loot from Midian and they brought back some kelim, some vessels, some dishes, so the Torah told us that you have to kasher this kelim because they're treif, they absorbed treif, so the kelim are treif and you have to kasher it. So when the Torah talks about the dinim of Hagolas Klein Midian, about the kashering of the kelim of Midian, frag the Ramban asks, Verwasserten ungesagt die Hilches, Aloches von Hagolas Klein Nochrim, erst bei Melchemes Midian und nicht früher bei Melchemes Sichenweg. Why did the Torah, the Eibishter, tell the Yidden the halachas of kasher and kelim only after the war with Midian when they got the kelim of Midian? Why didn't the Eibishter tell it to them earlier when they had the war with Sichon and Eig? Was Eich von Zeyam the Yidden genommen Shalom? They also took loot from there. Was in them seine doch sicher gewenig kelim. So certainly there were kelim there too. So why didn't the Eibishter tell the Yidden to kasher the kelim after the war with Sichon and Eig? The Rabban answers, as Eren Sicha Ve'eg Menachlas Yisrael, Eren Sicha Ve'eg is from the inheritance of the Eden. That's a place that belonged to the Eden, didn't settle there. For Hutelem Kol Shlolom, and everything that they took as Sholom, which as loot, the Eibishter allowed it, and then Afilo HaYisurim, even things which are forbidden. V'omer Rabbi Seinu, like the Chachamim said in the Gemara Chum, Kadlo de Chazer Ishtelu. Afilo means dried up Chazer. Pig was allowed to be eaten. So therefore, over there's no problem with kashering the kelim because even treifa food was allowed, whatever they took from Eretz Sichon Ve'eg. So certainly the kelim that absorbed treif was certainly allowed because the treif itself was allowed. Avo Midian lehoyim mishalahem. Midian is not theirs. Midian doesn't belong to Eden. They didn't take their land. Like Lin came Nikmosam. The only reason they went to war is to take revenge. So there was a Isser in the Kelim. So they were not allowed to eat any treif of food that they took from Midian. And the Kelim were also treif. And that's when the Eibishter told the Eden the din of kasher and Kelim. Now some would wonder that even though the Gemara says that when they went to war, they were allowed to eat even treifa thing, kadol de chazere, even dried pig, but it would seem that that's only during the war. But when they brought it home, they brought it back, then the Isser is there. And all the Mefarshim speak about it on the Ramban, and they say that the Ramban holds not like that, that the kelim or anything they food that they took from the Melchemes Sichon Ve'eg, even later when they had it, was allowed. Even the treifa food was allowed. Now the treifa food was allowed. The treifa kelim were allowed, so you didn't have to kasher it. That's why the Torah didn't tell the Eden the dinim of kasher and kelim in that war. But when they came to Melchemes Midian, that's a war that they were not allowed to eat treif. When they took treif in that war, the sholol. So the kelim that were treif, that absorbed treif in the walls of the kelim were treif, and you had to kasher it. That's why then they were told the dinim of kashering. Fragen Mefarshim there. So some Mefarshim ask, in der Parsha sind Yidden angesagt geworden, nicht nur auf die Dinge von Geule Kelim shel Nochrim. In this Parsha, the Yidden were commanded not only to kasher the Kelim, the vessels of the Goyim, because the vessels absorb treif, nor eichev tfilas Kelim shel Nochrim. Also, you have to table. We know that when you take a Kelim from a Goy, you only could use it if you table it. You immerse it in the mikveh. The Rasha brings this door up. Rasha brings it here in the Psukim that in this Parsha where he talks about kasher in the kelim, it also talks about table in the kelim. When the Rabban Alein is the Meirich them, the Ramban himself on this posik and in this parsha goes at length to talk about the dinim of tvilas kelim and how you kasher the kelim. So if here they were told the dinim of table in kelim is a hein travazayin is a niknstabe geworden of tvilas kelim früher. So why weren't they commanded the din of tvilas kelim, of immersing the kelim, table in the kelim before by Melchemes Sichon Ve'eg? In other words, the same question we have, why they weren't commanded the dinim of kasher and kelim in the previous war by Sichon Ve'eg, was same kasher we have here too. They got this too. Why weren't they commanded the dinim of tvilas kelim over there and only over here? And here we can't answer the same answer as the Ramban said why they were not told before the dinim of kasher and kelim. as I feel as by Milchemes Sichon Ve'eg is I feel the Kadal Chazayda Ishtalahu. And over there they didn't have to kasher it because they could even eat treif itself. You can't answer it like dinim of Tfilas Kelim. But the time from Tfilas Kelim is not to live them Easter was in the Kele. Because the reason why you have to take the Kelim is not because the forbidden taste of the food is in the Kele and you're getting rid of it. For Mechnaya Kelim Shanochim Darf Nom Tfilah. Even new Kelim of a goy, not because it has any treif in it. There's just a din that you have to table a Kele you took from a goy. Nor be a state in the Shalom. What's the reason for Tfilas Kelim? Says in Yerushalmi, because the Kele went out from the impurity of a goy and went into the Kedusha of Eid, which some people would say is similar to the concept of Geiros. When the Eid goes to the mikveh, when a goy goes to the mikveh to become a Eid, it's because he went into the Kedusha. Same thing, I put him just a remez, that the Kelim that belonged to a goy, not because it was treif, even if it's new Kelim, that's kosher a Kelim. When it goes from a goy to Eid, you got to table it. So the question is, that din would apply to the Kelim they took by Sichon and Neg also. Why doesn't the Torah tell us there, the dinim, the Eibush to tell the Yidden there, the dinim of Tfilas Kelim? Nagamas the Ramban schreibt gleich for them, even though the Ramban writes right before this, he writes, Libi Maharer Eid Lemesh Tvila Zumi Divrayim. My heart tells me, he says, that this din that you have to table Kelim is only a din midrabanon, mikro asmachta also, he's saying, even though we learn it from a posik, the posik doesn't teach you the din, but the posik is only an asmachta. Asmachta means that the Chachamim could make a din and they find a remez, a hint in a posik. So the posik that we learn from here, the dinim that you have to table kelim from goyim, is only an asmachta. So if it's only an asmachta, means midaraisa you don't have to. So the whole din of table kelim is on the real din midaraisa. So you can't ask a shaila l'chora why you didn't say it before, because you don't really need to. There's a minute movement that doesn't answer the question. The Ramban fit the choice. Number one, he says the Ramban says that sort of Talmud. You have to look into this. Das heißt, that it is besofik. He's not sure. Still, there's a possibility it's the Raisa. And if it's the Raisa, we have the kasha. Why didn't they wish to tell the Yidden that by Muhammad Sichon Veik? Second thing is, I feel like their mikra is not an asmachte. Even if we say the posik is only an asmachte. Can we doch echt fragen? We still could ask. For what stellt die Teire die Werte von der Asmachte bei Muhammad Midyan und nicht bei Muhammad Sichon Veik? The Torah puts these words here in order to have an asmachte for the din of Tfilas Kelim. Why did the Torah put the asmachte by the Milcham of Midian here and not earlier by the Milcham Sichon Veik? And Gimel, the third question is, whichever way we're going to look at it, besides the question, what's the reason why they didn't say, they realize what's the answer to this question? There's another question. Whatever the answer shall be, why didn't the Ramban ask it? Just like the Ramban asks, why the Torah didn't tell the dinim of Yeulei Kelim, which means kasher in Kelim. Why didn't it say that when they got Kelim from Sichon Ve'ei? And he gives an answer, but he asks the kasha. Why doesn't he ask the kasha? Why the Torah, the Eibush didn't tell the Yidden about Tfilas Kelim when they got the Kelim by Sichon after Sichon Ve'ei? The Chura what me can verrenten. The Chura could answer this. Says Yedua we know as nicht alle mitzvahs eine gegeben geworden gleich beim Matan Torah. Not all mitzvahs were given right away by Shas Matan Torah. Seine vorankamen mitzvahs, seine gesagt geworden nach später Diensmann. Certain mitzvahs were told a later time. These are Philip B'Shnas Arboim. Some mitzvahs were told the last year they were in the desert, the 40th year. Al derech Parshas Nachlas, just like the parsha of inheritance, the dinim of inheritance, was in Nischadish geworden später durch the Bnei Slavchot, which was Nischadish became a new din. The Eibush said through Bnei Slavchot, and the Bnei Slavchot came and claimed that they also want to share in Yisrael, and that's when the Eibush gave the dinim of Nachlas. And that was all the way at the end, and then by the end of the 40 years. So we see not all mitzvahs were told right away. So therefore you can't ask, so you can't ask, why didn't the Eibush tell the Yidden the dinim of tabling the kelim before by Muhammad Sichon Veik, by Muhammad Midyan is gekommen des man, when it's nischadish geworden der Inyan. Because that wasn't the time yet for this din to be said. Like other dinim were not said. So this wasn't the time where this new din should be said. Al derech, like we have a loshen, nit no teira v'nischat she'aloche. It says this loshen ikmen negei dinim that were there from before Matan Torah. Later on, when the Eibush gave that din, it's a new halacha. That means there came a time when the Eibush gave a new halacha. So here also, probably the halacha of Tfilas Kelim was not important then yet. Whatever the reason is that the Eibush had, he didn't give it yet, and he gave the din only by Muhammad Midyan. But then you could ask, so why couldn't we answer the same thing in the Geya the kashering of kelim. In other words, even by kashering kelim shouldn't have been a kasher. If we go with this dying, that it's no kasher b'chlal, why certain dinim were not said before. So the same thing we would say by Gula Kelim. So the Rebbe says no. Those are the Ramban frekt yeb negei Gula Nochin. This is the Ramban does as the kasher, the negei kasher in the Kelim. Why it wasn't said before? We could answer. Time hasn't come yet. Said that. He says the Farba says muchat zu sagen as the din for Niser Belua, because we have to say that this din, that any treife taste of food that's absorbed in the walls of a kele, as das was is nibel geworden von adover osser in der kele is osser and asser the kele. This that anything that was absorbed, any treife of food that was absorbed in the walls of the kele and makes the kele osser, you shouldn't give him for free. That Easter was there before. Before million. See, if not for this, we could have said like the whole din that a taste that's balua absorbed in the walls of the kele is osser. Remember, you have to kasher the kelim. Maybe just happened that din was nischadesh at the time of Mochemes Midian, but it's not true. We know that that din was there before that. Anything that's balua that's absorbed in the walls of the kele is osser. So then you can't say that this was the only time. This was the time that it started. Where do we see it before? It states in a Friedrich Parsha. It says in Parsha Tzav, in the previous Parsha, but it says that when you cook the korbanos in the kele, if you cooked the korban, meat of the korban, in a klecheres, in an earthen kele, you got to break the kele. But if you cooked it in a copper kele, you got to rinse it with water. Rashi says, what does that mean? And we're talking about what Rashi says, Pasha Tzav, which is much before Pasha's Matos. Rashi says, the kele, the earthen kele that absorbed, that was the food was cooked into and absorbed. Yeshavet has to be broken. The because the taste that's in there, after the time when you're allowed to eat the korban is over, becomes neiser, becomes osir. So whatever is absorbed in the kele, time passes and it becomes osir. So you got to break it. Meidek v'shut. Then it said if it was copper, you got to rinse it. Means what for? It means to kasher it, lift it, put it in hot water, lift it as bliose, to take out the absorbance of the taste of the food. So that's already written before. So it comes out as the Rinya from Iser Balua, Shen Givem from Frier. That this whole din of Iser Balua, that something that's absorbed in the kele is also is already said before. Now in the order 16, the Rebbe says, well, maybe you could say that before it was written by Karbonis, or maybe it's a din in Kochim, but there's no to say that. Why would we think it's a din in Kochim? It has nothing to do with Kochim. It has to do with the practicality that there's a taste of something forbidden. So it's hard to say that it's a din in Kochim. So probably from there we know that there's a din by any treif of food that was cooked in the kele, and the kele absorbed the taste of that treif of food. That kele is also because that taste that's absorbed is also. And if so, frag the Ramban. That's why the Ramban asked, why did Hashem tell the Eden the dinim of kasher in kelim only by the case of Mochemes Midian, or need by frier dikemol need no marang gekrogen kelim was darf not gil, and not by the previous time when the Eden got kelim that needed to be kasher? But maybe we understand why by the case of Giuli Nochim kasher in kelim, we can't answer that the reason it didn't say it before because the time hasn't come yet. Because that's not true. We see from the time has come because we see this iser of blia taste that's absorbed in the kele is already there from before, and that's the whole purpose of kashering. The whole purpose of kashering is to get the blia out. That din is there before. But concerning table and kele, maybe take the din wasn't said before because the time hasn't come yet. He didn't know about it. So the time for this din came at the Mochemes Midian. That's why he didn't say it before. So you can't ask a kasha why didn't he say it before. So the Rebbe says it's still not simple. About the Ramban redt wegen beide Sachen, sei Gule noch im sei Tefillah. If you look at the Ramban, you see the Ramban is discussing both the Yonim, kashering of the kelim and tabling of the kelim. So since he's talking about both of them, he should at least, in short, mention that there is a difference between the two. When he asked this kasher, how come by the kashering of the kelim he didn't say before, he should have mentioned at least that concerning tabling, I don't have a question. because he was talking about tefillin also. So he should have said the kitchen. Was the Rebbe fragt an order of Giyulei Nachrim and not tefillin? He should have explained the kitchen at least why he's only asking this kasher ben negeya kashering, not ben negeya tefillin. And since he doesn't say it, so obviously this is not the reason. Now there is when you say them, and so too, and even more, is not moving in them was andere Meforshim verantworten, bei was man nicht angesagt Tfilas came by Mechem Sichen Ve'ig. So it says also there are other truths that Meforshim give why he didn't tell the Eden about Tevel and Kalim by the first war, by the war of Sichen Ve'ig. So they give all kinds of reasons. So the same thing the Rebbe says it's not so good. Why? Was the nice of the Chukim seinen doing Yadr from the Terutz, Ben Kamekame, besides the fact in every teretz, when you look into it, there's a dechek. It's not simple, the kvetch, those each separate. But besides that, is do the Shaila Klolis, even if you'll find, even if these answers would be good answers, there's one general question. Favos stellt sich nicht der Ramban of their Shaila. Why the Ramban doesn't ask? The Ramban talks about both in Yonim, Kasher in Kalim, and about Tevlin, and he asks the Kasher why he didn't the Torah say, Amish to say the din of Kasher and Kalim before. He should have at least mentioned, but Tfilas Kalim might have an answer, whatever the answer shall be. So he says the answer of the other Meforshim B'chlal is very hard answers to answer, but even whatever it is, besides that, why doesn't the Ramban make any note of it and mention at least the possibility of it? Why a reason why the Torah did the Abish did not sell the Eden about Tevel and Kalim before? Wird sein das Verstehen behagt ihm noch zwei Tmiyas in the meaning of Tfilas Kalim. First, by bringing two more kashas concerning the din of Tevel and Kalim. Number one, as you do about the Leib Yehuda and the Chasam Sefer schreiben, no, but the Leib Yehuda and the Chasam Sefer write, but when verkauft them chometz and goy for Pesach, when you do mechiras chometz, you sell your chometz to the goy before Pesach, so man nicht verkaufen the Kalim chamutzim. Do not include in the shtar mechira, do not sell the chometz like Kalim, which means Kalim that were used for chometz, so they absorbed in the walls chometz. Well, demot that they dar from table sein beim zurückgeben, they from them goy noch Pesach, because if you sold them, means it belongs to the goy. After Pesach, you buy it back, so you bought a keilah from a goy. You will have to table the keilah. Aber in Nusach Shtar Mechira von Alten Rebbe steht geschrieben, but in the Nusach, the Loshen of the Alter Rebbe's document of selling chometz to the goy, it says like this: when he says I'm selling all my chometz, kelim chamutzim sheyesh aleim chometz ben. I'm also including kelim that were chometzik, and that says that have upon them chometz be'en, if they have real chometz on it, is included in the sale. The sale means like this: as the kelim ben farkeitzim goy. Like he says, you sell the kelim chamutzim she'esherim chometz, you sell to the goy. Und von deswegen gefindt man nicht, that the Alter Rebbe soll sagen, as noch Pesach darf man table sein the kelim. And still the Alter Rebbe does not say, we don't find anywhere where he says that after Pesach, when you buy it back, you have to table the kelim. My seravas means any table, and we know the fact is that no, we don't table, not table it. Even though in the Alter Rebbe Shtar Mechira we sell the kelim. In Shara Kela, the Rebbe says, in the Sefer Shara Kela, which is written by the great-great-grandfather of the Rebbe, David Lavut, Farentveter, he answers this. Why talk according to the Alter Rebbe, you don't have to table the kelim? As a Baal, the Alter Rebbe says, kelim chamutzim sheshalim chometz ben. The Alter Rebbe says we include kelim chamutzim. Chometz dike kelim, but then the Alter Rebbe adds that have upon them real chometz. See, normally the kelim, chometz dike kelim means that in the walls there's a taste of chometz. But there's another thing. Chometz ben means real chometz. There's chometz stuck to them. There's chometz that says, so what do we sell? He says, we sell the kelim chamutzim that have upon them real chometz. And the din is, but he says the din is, as kol kelim any kelim that the yid has a chometz kelim and doesn't want to kasher it to be used for Pesach, tzorich l'shaf shafon, you have to clean it properly, ladichan, and rinse it. Shalei chometz nikeven, the chometz should not be seen on them. The Mela Kumtuis, it comes out. So he says. So it comes out like this. The Alter Rebbe says you only have to sell, you're selling the kelim that have chometz on them. But the din is that you have to take off the chometz anyway. So if you have to take off chometz from all the kelim that you're not kashering, so automatically, so you're not selling those kelim. Because the Alter Rebbe says you only have to sell the kelim that has chometz on it. And the din is you should take off the chometz. And then b'meila you're not selling it. So it comes out that according to the Alter Rebbe, you're not selling any kelim. You bald is eine rein chometz ben, since it's clean chometz ben. Und nur klei suda is eine chayav in tefillah. Only kelim that you use for suda is chayav tefillah. And the kelim that have chometz ben, it's only kelim you have to sell. And the din is you have to take off all the chametz. So b'meila comes out that you don't sell. So no kelim be sold. That's why you don't have to table them. Oh, but the teretz is not moving. The teretz is not understood. The din from tzorich l'shafshafon batzitzach doch chafal kelim. This that you have to clean the kelim and take away the chametz to end goes on all the kelim. The bal the kelim but tzorich l'shafshafon. So you need nichlol l'shitosim mishara kelim in the mechira. And according to the shara kelim, those kelim that you do clean, you do rinse, that has no chametz ben, don't sell. So welche seien as the kelim der mont in star mechira was man verkehrt in chametz. So what are the kelim that we sell in chametz? The Rebbe says we sell kelim chamutzim, and those that have chametz ben. So he says that you have to take off chametz ben anyway. So if you take off the chametz ben, so there is no kelim that you have that have chametz ben. The mele, the kelim are not sold, and that's why you don't have to table any kelim. But the Rebbe says, I don't understand. According to what he's saying, there is no kelim that we sell. Which kelim do we sell? If you have to take off the chametz from the kelim, from all the kelim, and any kelim that has no chametz on it, you don't have to sell. So then what does he mean, kelim chamutzim, that include in the star kelim chamutz? We have to say, as in star mechira bavonten, that when you write in the star mechira, the kelim means, Eib me'ezeh sibir, man nit mishafshikireh. Al-Trebetaka says that you have to clean all the kelim. And any kelim that you clean, you don't have to sell. But then which kelim are you selling? Obviously, it means if for some reason you did not clean a kelim, which you should have, but you did not, you're selling those kelim. Not only the chametz on the kelim, you're selling those kelim. Because the Rebbe uses lotion, kelim chamutzim, sheyesh alim chametz ben. Kelim chamutzim that have chametz ben. Even though the way he says the kshara kelim, in most cases, there's no sale of the kelim. Because the way he says, the Alter Rebbe learns you only have to sell the kelim that have chametz ben, and really the din is you should take off the chametz. Oh, the Alter Rebbe still includes kelim if you didn't take off the chametz for some reason. So you're selling the kelim that have the chametz on it, so you're selling the kelim too. So the Alter Rebbe is talking about selling certain kelim. If I say the choder kusha l'duchta, so the kasha comes back. So the Alter Rebbe does say there are kelim, whatever amount, but there are kelim that are sold. If there are kelim that are sold, those kelim at least you should have to be table. How come the Alter Rebbe doesn't say anywhere that any kelim that you sold, you have to table? So we're back to the question, why don't we table the kelim that we sold in the chametz? Muzma sagen, so we have to say like this, even though kelim that have chametz on them, which you forgot to take off, or whatever reason, but it has chametz, is included in the shtar, and you are selling it to the goy, von deswegen darf man sagen, the shittas ad murazogen can will nicht haben. Nevertheless, you don't have to table it. For some reason, the Rebbe will explain later, but this comes out from here. That according to Alter Rebbe, there are certain kelim that you sell, chametz kelim that you sell. So according to the way the some Sefer Neidib Yehuda hold, that if you sell kelim, you have to table it. So those kelim that Alter Rebbe says that you sell, you should have to table. Why don't you have to table it? Must be that even though you sold them to the goy, and normally a kelim, when you buy back from a goy or buy from a goy, you have to table. In this case, you don't. Why? That is the second question. And if from the time of a minig, so essen macholi cholo b'yem alav the chag hashvuos is one of the reasons why we eat milchiks, dairy foods, on the first day of Shavuos. The reason is like that. To remind us that the day of Matan Torah, which is Shavuos, the Yidden ate milchiks, they ate dairy food. Why? Who says they ate dairy food? The Baal does it. Mitzvah Shchita sei nicht mitzvah geworden. Wir ruben kekulam from mitzvah Matan Torah since to shecht. When were the Eden commanded to shecht? By Matan Torah, like all the mitzvahs. Before Matan Torah, there was no such thing. Seine bald Nase geworden, alle seine Fleischige Macholim. So all Fleischigs, all meat foods became treif. Because it wasn't geschochten. There was no mitzvah of Schchita. So if it wasn't geschochten, so then now it's treif. And kelim welche sie haben gehabt. And the kelim that they had, that they cooked in the meat, also became treif because it absorbed the taste of the meat, and the meat became treif now. By Farmaten Teda, before Matan Teda, they were not obligated to shecht. So even if they physically shecht it, doesn't matter. That shechita doesn't count. It's like nowadays a goy will shecht. The Eden were like goyim, so to speak. So Mele, by Matan Teda, they became Eden. Now they have a din of shechita, and all the meat that they had were geschochten before, so it was not geschochten, so to speak, from Eden. They couldn't eat any meat, they couldn't eat any food that was cooked with meat. So Mechlin, you can't be a Matan Teda shechten behemoths. Maybe they shechted on the day after Matan Torah. Can't say that. Kasher say the kelim, or on the day of Matan Torah, they kashered all the kelim. Well, the kul alma b'Shabbos nitna Torah. Everyone agrees the Torah was given on Shabbos or to Shabbos. So Shabbos you can't shech, Shabbos you can't table. Say you must essen nor machol echolov. So B'meila there was no other choice but to eat milk. But you could ask a shayla on that. The Azayom say you can't essen machol with the shel cholov. How could they even eat milking food cooked from milk? Milchiks, how could they eat? Now, for some odd reason, as we'll see, I want to skip a few lines and I want to go 4 lines further, and that will be the hemshech of the kasha. The kasha is, how could they even eat milchiks? Why? They really had to kasha their milchige kelim too. Why? Was eine Nesse geworden, machen wir es dem, was misfir nicht gewinn abgehiet von Kochen, ist Bosser, oder Taruvas Bosser Mecholov. Before they weren't careful, they cooked, even in the milchige kelim, they cooked meat, because it was the format in Torah, so they were allowed to eat Bosser Mecholov. So probably they cooked meat in the same kelim, or even meat that looked together, they cooked. So how could they even cook? You have to have the kele, should be a kosher kele. And the kele probably was treif. Even the milchige kelim was treif. Because before Matan Torah, they mixed milk and meat. So the milchige kelim also were not through the milk. Now, one might say, who says that they ate cooked food? Maybe they just drank milk, that's all. But so now we're going back to the beginning of the page here. The Deicha Gadol Leimer, it's a big Deicha to say, that they didn't eat any food. They just drank milk, ate butter, but they didn't have cooked food. Aber nicht kein Tafshili. And B'mel, the kasha was they had to kasha the kelim. Maybe they didn't use kelim. They didn't cook any kelim, use kelim for this. But it's a Deicha. If they would have dafke not eaten cooked food of milchiks, so the meaning that we do now to eat milchiks on Shavuos is to remember what they did then. Part of the meaning should be this too, that we should not eat it from dish, not eat anything that's cooked. We should just eat plain cold stuff, but not milk stuff. There's no such thing. So it comes out that they ate cooked stuff, but the stuff was cooked in kelim that were treif. So you have to kasher the kelim. And they couldn't kasher the kelim that day. So they couldn't even eat milchiks, because the milchiks that they had was cooked before in kelim that were treif. So just like they couldn't eat the meat and any meat food because it was treif, they couldn't eat milk either. Because the milchiks, if they ate cooked stuff, which Bepashas they did, was cooked in a kelim which is treif. That's that kash. But the Rebbe says it's a sneaking kash. That's not a kash. Why? Let's legt sich zu sagen, because it makes sense to say, as I was getting dik from Mitzrayim, when they went on the Mitzrayim, wissen dik as Beitziach Hashem Mitzrayim tappen so Kimal Hara. They knew the Rebbe told Moshe Rabbeinu before he told the Yidden that at the time you're going to serve the Eibishter Har Sinai. That means Yidden knew that they're going to receive the Torah. So they knew what the dinim are going to be. Then Yidden given Nizer in mitzvahs, so they were careful in mitzvahs. Eichen Basar B'Cholov, so they were careful not to mix milk and meat. So for sure they had separate kelim for milchiks, for dairy. They are nicht nasser geworden from Machol Basar, and they didn't become meat in it also. Or they're from Basar Machol or a combination of milk and meat. They didn't do that. So Apashtas, they were careful before. Now, before we said, I'm just mentioning, before we said that the fact that they shechted it before doesn't make it good, because there it's a different thing. There, even if they shechted it, but since the Torah wasn't given, their shechita didn't count. Here, they were talking about the halacha of shechita. Here we're talking about the fact where the kelim did the kelim have a mixture of basar b'cholov. So Bapash does not, because they were careful, even though they weren't mechuyev, but they were careful not to mix basar b'cholov. So the meat kelim they couldn't, because the meat was not geshochten. It was geshochten by Yidden before, but they're not considered Yidden. So the meat streif and the kelim that the meat was cooked in a streif. But concerning the kelim was used from fleishinks and milchiks, so here we say that no, it wasn't a problem, because they probably had 2 sets of dishes. They had milchik separate and fleishik separate, because they knew what was going to happen later. Neisif to them, besides it, is eine dog gewisse Kehle, because eine Reutz lives there to not from Al. There are certain dishes that you could only use it for milk. The way the dishes are made, you can only use it for milk. So the problem of basar v'cholov, that how could they eat milk when the kelim that they cooked in them was basar v'cholov, is not true. First of all, they could have used dishes which will only made for milk like Sachen. But the filler not. They probably kept separate sets of dishes and they didn't mix dishes for milk. So when it's moving, but the other kasha comes up. It's talking about the kelim. Really, they didn't have to kasha the kelim. Finally, say is not given complete. So there was nothing absorbed in the kelim because the milk kelim meat was never cooked there, so it only had the absorbance, the taste of milk. That's no problem. So therefore, they didn't have kasha in it. Rabbi Matan Teres and the Yidden Arayin Vloshna Yishal Mekdushas Yisrael. The Yidden by Matan Teres went into the status of holy from Yidden. See, the Rambam says that the Shalmi says the Loshen. Why do you have to kasha kelim? From the union of a goy to Kedushas Yisrael. That happened by Matan Torah, right after Matan Torah, when Eden became Eden. So then the Eden left the level of goy and became Kedushas Yisrael. So they had to table these kelim because these kelim belonged to them before when they were not holy yet, they were not Eden. So basically, the kelim entered the Kedusha of Yisrael. So even though it wasn't treif, because they didn't mix milk and meat, but they couldn't use the kelim anyway because they had to table it. He's holding a kushel the kasha comes back. How did they use the milk kelim without tabling? Kashering they didn't, but tabling they did. But the Rabbi here in the order 30 says one thing is that even if we'll hold that tabling kelim is midarabanan, but they kept the rabbanon also, so they probably wouldn't eat from a kelim that wasn't tabled. In the order 31, the Rebbe says, we're asking a shayla, the Chura, they had to table the kelim because they themselves were goyim before, now they became Yidden, like a Geirus, they were Megayim Matan Torah, so they had to table their kelim. So the Rebbe says that in the Sefer Chadrei Deya, they brought down the Darka Tshuva, it says he's not so sure. There's a shayla, whether kelim of a goy that's Megayev, it's his own kelim. And he was Megayah, whether he also has to table it. Ongenumen is ongenumen that you do table it. But it's not so push. The Rebbe makes a point that could be that according to that day, it's not a problem. But the Pashtas is ongenumen that a ger that's Megayah has to table his kelim. So the Yidden had to table their kelim on the day of Matan Torah. And they couldn't use the kelim until they tabled it, but they didn't table it on Shabbos. So the kasha is back. Now, in Horah 32, the Rebbe says maybe they did table it, maybe they took a table it that day. So the Rebbe says you can't say that they tabled the kelim, because first of all, it doesn't say anywhere. It would have said someplace that they tabled the kelim on the day of Matan Torah. And another thing, there's a shaila whether you're allowed to table kelim on Shabbos. So therefore, back to the kasha, they probably didn't table the kelim, and how could they use it? Then the Rebbe says maybe the different thing. Maybe they only use kelim that doesn't need tefillah, because to be tabled, not all kelim have to be tabled. Table metal, glass. But earthenware, for instance, you don't have to be tabled. So maybe they managed to use only kelim that doesn't need tefillah. But the Rebbe says, it's a deichek to say that because it's interesting. It would have been mentioned someplace that amongst the minhagim that we eat milchiks to remember what they did then should have been part of the minig to only eat from dishes that don't eat tefillah. From all this comes out that they didn't table it. And the question is, how could he eat without tabling it? So this is what the Rebbe is going to answer here. Basically, two kashas we have. The first kasha that the Rebbe said before, how come we don't have to table the kelim according to the Alter Rebbe after we buy it back from the goy after Pesach? And the second thing is, how could the Eden even eat milchiks on Shavuos? Because now became all the dinim. One of the dinim is to table kelim, and you can't table kelim on Shabbos or some. So how did they even eat milchiks that were cooked? Because it's cooked in the kelim, you couldn't use kelim. So the Rebbe says like this: "We get feel more. Come in the Ruslan from Peter Shasha Latei Yonim of Flame Mecher Derech Halacha." The Rebbe says, I said many times that from Rasha and Chumash we could learn out great things, even in Nigla in Halacha. Chotz Rasha is Mefarat Pshuta Shel Mikra. Even the Rasha explains Pshuta Shel Mikra. The Rebbe is Klal, and we all know that Rasha only explains the simple pshat of the pasuk. But the fun is moving, and we cannot pass in Halacha from Yoni Halacha was named Terus from Peter Shasha Derech Halacha. So obviously we cannot take out the halacha from what Rashi says in Chumash, because Rashi and Chumash mainly is to tell you the pshat, but not the paskin halacha. And we have here in Order 34, the Rebbe says, even Rashi and Gemara, we know that Rashi is called a parshan, not a paskin. He's not a pesik. He doesn't paskin. Rashi was a pesik. Yes, Chuvas, he has other things. But in Gemara, he just a mefarish. He just explains, not a pesik. So Chumash avade. So the Chura, how could the Rebbe is going to answer kashas in Niglin halacha from Rashi and Chumash? Chura, how can we do that? Von deswegen aber nevertheless, eine do wo Rashi bringt darauf Opinion und nicht das Satzmänner Shem Rabbi said Rashi in Chumash, even though his main thing is pshat of the posik, Rashi sometimes brings from the Gemara. Rashi brings Rabbi Seinu Dorsho, the Rebbe said, but the fun is moving for that we understand as Agam dos is adrash was his negates of Pshuta Shomikra. Even though when Rashi brings something from Rabbi Seinu, from Gemara, from Halacha, it's because that fits to Pshuta Shomikra. Und der Rebbe bringt das Rashi Rabbi Pirush, that's what Rashi can bring it. Is es aber echt ausgehalten in der Meif na Limut für Rabbi Seinu Dorsho in the Limut of the Halacha. But since Rashi brings it Rabbi Seinu Dorsho, so whatever Rashi says fits to the halacha. Stamazay from Rashi you can't learn that, but when Rashi brings up, he's saying that Rashi brings something, a halacha thing that he brings, the same halacha, you could use that to explain things in halacha. As when it done is there beer because on al from Pirish Nashadon to Parsha. So to answer these questions we said before, it will be understood by first understanding what Rashi says in our Parsha. And this is what the Rebbe says. The Rashi brings the Rob the meaning from Tvilas Kelim. If the Werte Rachba Meniti is Chato. When Rashi brings this ding that you have to table the Kelim, the words where it says in Pose Arba Mei Nida Yischato, that Mei Nida means water, that they need a good table, which means a mikveh. You should clean it. Zok Tes Rashi says like this, Pshat in these words. According to simple Pshat and Pose, what it means is you got to take it to the mikveh because it was Tomei. There's a din of Tumas Mes. If something touched the dead body, or other types of tumor, you have to table it. So the posuk says, "B'mei nido yischata" means you have to table something that's tomei. That's it. Omerlen, he said to them that besides that, tzrichim hakelim giul, they also have to be kasher. And Rashi uses the lotion letaro min isur to make him pure from the isur, from the treifa stuff. V'chitu letaro min atumah, and also you have to clean it to make a torah from tumah. So Rashi says here that you have to be metayar from the Isur, which is kashering. You have to make a toyer from the Isur, from the treifa food, the taste that's in there. And you also have to table it because it's tummy. All these things became tummy because the soldiers who brought them back killed people, so they became tummy, so you have to table it. But then Rashi says, so again, the Pasha Pshat and Posig making is telling you two dinim. You have to kasher take Sefer Kelim, and you have to table tummy dike Kelim. Rabbi Seinu Dorshem Mikan, Rabbi Chomim Darshan, that also you have to table it. Lahachshira means you have to table it, even just tefillah, even if it didn't become tomei, you have to table it. Why? So the strange lotion of Rashi is min ha'isur. You have to be machshiret min ha'isur. So Rashi connects the tabling of the kelim because of the isur. Moving from Rashi, from Rashi we understand, as we should say, according to Rashi, the reason you have to table the kelim is connected to because there's iser in it. Lachshiron min iser, to make him prepared, to make it a kosher from the iser that's in it. It's hard to say that. The din is doch azech kelim chatoshim zayin b'choyim b'tfilah. The din is even if you buy new kelim from a guy, you have to table. Chazeham niten sich den blias iser. New kelim never absorbed any food, so it didn't absorb any trade. But the Gemara is mas, but the Gemara explains. But Yesheni believe in Kadosh and Dome, old kelim, but you kashered it. It's new, it's like new. I feel hachabaya tefillah, it's left to the table. The Gemara learns out that you have to table new kelim. In other words, to table kelim, the din of tefillah, has nothing to do with that it absorbed tape. Kashering is to get rid of the taste inside the walls of the kelim, but not tabling. So the kasha is, what does Rashi mean when he says lachshiron min ha'isur? Noch mehr, go even more. Rashi Alein Taij Diverte from Sima Pose. Rashi himself explains the words of the end of the Pose where it says Kol Asher Le Yoveh Tavira B'Mayim. Pose says how to kasher. Anything that became treif through fire, you had the kasher with fire. Anything that didn't go into fire, it only got kasher treif through heat, through liquid, hot. Made that's how you got treif. Tavira B'Mayim, the kasher with water. Kol Asher Le Yoveh. So Rashi teaches these words. on the words v'chol asher le'yov beish, whatever is non-applied. Kol dover she'ei tashmish al dei ha'eir, anything that you didn't use through heat, v'lei bola isur, and it didn't absorb isur. So the pasuk says, "Taviru b'mayim" here is not exactly like I said before to kasher. Here it means kasher with water. Matbili v'daye. In other words, like this: when they brought the kalim from the war, he said to them, "Two, you got a kasher and you got a table." And he said like this: anything that absorbed isur, you got a kasher. Anything that didn't absorb isur, you still got a table because they're tummy. So we see from here that the only reason you got to be to kasher it from isur is connected to the kashering process, but the tefillah is not connected to any isur. And the kelim they ball isur, since the kelim did not absorb isur, we're talking about the kelim that needs tefillah, which is not treif. We pass the zogam the tables on lachshirim and isur. How do we say that you have to table it to make it kosher from the isur? There's no isur involved. And Rashi says clearly that we're talking here about the case that Leib isur. When it says tavir b'mayim, which means you got to table it, which is tefillas kelim, which is for the tefillah also, not so poshut the way I expressed it before, that madbili v'daya, you table it from the tumah, but it's tabling even when it's not tumah, but you got to table it, and it wasn't belay from Isser. So we see clearly that you got to table it, even if it's not belay Isser. So how does Rashi say tefillah, the mikveh for kele is lachshirim in the Isser? Das wäre verstandig bei Hagam Dik im Loschen Rashi. So es ist explained Dik mit Eiken Rashi. By Gil sagt Rashi, das tut the Tarem in the Isser. When it comes to kashering the case, Rashi says the kashering makes a toer from the Isser. When I say a chitu, the pshut is the Tarem in Atum. The same thing when we say chitu, which means if it's tomei, you got to table it, not when the kele is not tomei. That's the Rabbi saying the dorsha, but the regular pshut is chitu goes if it's tomei. That means also the Tarem in Atum. You got to make a toer pure from tumei. Ashenke bat tefillah sagt dem Loschen lachshirim in the Isser. By tefillah stam, not tomedik kele. And it's just the fact that you have to table a kele you got from a goy, Rashi says lahachshirim. Rashi doesn't say letaron in the Isser. Yesh leimar, and with dem shinoi aloschen, the hemshech echad, when Rashi in one hemshech changes, zwischen hagola, where he writes it by kashering, he writes the word letaron, and tefillah, when you table the kelim when it's not treif or tomei, he uses the word lachshira on his Rashi Mavayir and Chibitz Vishnagol in Tefillah. Rashi explained what is the difference in kashering and being table. And the main thing the Rebbe says here is because you compare the two l'shenis. In Hora 38, the Rebbe says maybe you could use the word hechsher even if something is treif. Who says that that word is meduyik? But when you see Rashi writes two things in one hemshech, and one he uses one losh and one other losh, so then it's for sure bedafke trying to tell us something. That's why he changes the lotion. So by the Isser he uses the word taron, and by tabling the kelim he doesn't use the word lachshirim. What's the difference? The gather from tare shaykh nor by zach was hat sich tun der Isser. The word tare means to make toer is something that was tomei, or even by Isser something that was osir, you get rid of that Isser, you're metayef. Und der Riebe wird Hagola, therefore Hagola kashering was nehmt aruis de Metzias Isser was below that takes out the Isser, the trace, the taste that's there in the Kele. It's called Ongeruf from Latarim and Isser. So we call Latarim means to cleanse. The cleansing is something that had bad in it. It's bad, whether it's Tomei or Treif. Take it out, you may tire it. Lachshiron, what does the word Lachshiron mean? Is Viloshin Hachone. Lachshiron means to prepare. Al derech hechsher mitzvah. We have a lotion, certain things are mitzvah, and then sometimes there are things which are only hechsher mitzvah, they're only a preparation. Building sukkah. The mitzvah is to sit in the sukkah on sukkahs and eat in the sukkah. But before sukkahs, you got to build a sukkah. That's called hechsher mitzvah. The word hechsher means to prepare for something. So the kele wird muchen und muchshet zu kennen sich benutzen mit dir. So when it comes to table of kele, what it means is lahachshiron, you have to make it fit. That's what lahachsher means. Hechsher means to make it fit. You prepare it. It should be fit to be able to use it. That's what we need the tefillah, the kele for. Was heißt, the roof of tefillah is nicht so arusnehmen dem Metzias Isser from the kele. Tefillah is not to take out the Isser. If you use the word tara, tara means to cleanse. Cleanse it was dirty and you got to clean it. It means it was tummy or had Isser, we got to clean it. Tefillah that you have to table a kele got from a goy is not to take out the Isser that's in it. Das hat sich abgetan durch Hagolah. That happened if it was treif and you have to kasher it. Or das hat chillen nicht gewinnt, it could be it's a new kele. Never absorbed Isser. So you don't have to kasher it because there's nothing to take, nothing to be metayeh. But by tefillah, it's not for that reason. Nor zu machen the kele muchshe farai shtamshes von Aiden, to make it prepared, make it fit for the usage of a yid versus mushal from Isser, that a yid cannot have an Isser in it. From the Shores Valudlis Isser, it means from being possible, having the possibility of having an Isser in it, which means like this. When the kele is in the shoes for Nochi, the kele is in the shoes of a goy. I feel even even if he never used it. They never Easter came into it. Is obedodi of Shorius as Zayton. There's a possibility that'll do it. By a goy, there's a possibility that he'll do it. So if a goy owns a kele, it's all to be used for treif. On the river, therefore, when the kele get a river in the reshus na'idin, when the kele enters the reshus of a yid, so I stamshes was in need is nito afilo de Shorius van nut used by a yid that there's not even a possibility for it being Easter. Why? Because we're not allowed to. Not allowed to put Easter. And the order 39 star that ever says the Chazal say, and what we're not talking. The Torah didn't give dinim to Rishoyim. So obviously the Torah was giving dinim to all people, to good people. So a yid will not use trade. So when it comes to the Rishus from a yid, it doesn't have anymore the kayach, the possibility, the potential of being used for trade. So the Torah the kele has to be tabled to prepare it that it should be royu for only doing things which is not osir. That's like lachshiro means that's why I use the word lachshiro, not latayat. It's not taking anything out. It's being entered into a yid, and by that you're taking away the kele from its potential ability of being absorbed with isur, and now it's taken away from that, and that's why you have to table it. But dugma ben yaneinu. Where do we say such a thing that because it was possible something should happen, that's why it protects it as if it happened? So we have an example in Pashas Matos. Atziva b'neged and the Shem Midian, when they brought back the women of Midian. So the pasuk says, "Kol isha yadas ish harigo." Any woman was with a man, you should kill. But das meint, really, what this means is not only those actually who did it. Rashi says, even those who are fit, able to have relations with a man, even if they didn't have. So here we see that the ability of having the Be'ilah makes it that has a certain din effect on it. That now you have to kill these women who were able to have. So that's a good example that sometimes something that's able to have already has a din. Since the kele is able to be treif, so then afterwards, when you take it out from there, now it's not able to be treif, you have to kasher. The far darfen eich kelim chadoshim or the divas tashmisham b'tzayin, and therefore even new kelim, or those that you never absorbed treif, could be they're not new, but they were used with cold, so they didn't absorb. Hobbing tefillah, that's why you have to table. Hagamas Leib Isa, they never absorbed Isa. But with them Leib, as they have gefunden in the reshus von Nochi, the fact that they found themselves in the reshus of a goy, and they geworden royuk to be in Isa. Now it was fit to Isa, and that's a problem already. By a yid, the mile is that he's not fit to the Isa, and that's what you got to kasher for. You got to table the kele for. Okay, so now we knew a new concept of tefillah kele that does have to do with treif, but not with treif b'peil, but with the ability of absorbing treif. Now all three questions are answered. Which three questions? Number one, why did Ramban only ask the kasher? Why did Eibush told the din of kasher in kelim by media, not by stichem ve'eg, but it doesn't ask the same kasher by tabling the kelim, which he told him in this pasha. Why doesn't it say there? It's one kasher we asked. Why don't we have to table the kelim that we sold to the goy in the chametz when we buy it back? Third kasha was, how did they use the kelim, the milchige kelim, without tabling? He said they ate milk because they couldn't eat flesh, but they couldn't eat milk either. They had to table the kelim. Obviously, they didn't have to table. Why wouldn't they? So the answer now, each kasha is answered based on this yisod. The yisod that the union of tabling kelim has to do with the fact that it had an ability of becoming treif. So number one, the first kasha and the Ramban is right away answered. The Ramban tells us Pirish Rashi. Ramban is talking. His whole Pirish is talking on the Negei Rashi. It is mighty Loshe Rashi. The verb Kol Hashel Yova B'Eish. He quotes Rashi's Loshen on these words Kol Hashel Yova B'Eish. And he goes into a discussion in these words of Rashi. Rashi zok das tefillah de lachshirim v'nisur. So he's talking about Shittas Rashi. Rasha is the one that used the Lashon, as we said before, Lachshira B'Isur, which means, according to Rasha, as we said before, the whole reason of Tfilas Kelim is to take it because it had the potential of being treif. If the whole thing is because it had potential of Isur, that Tevel in Kelim is also because of the Isur. So we have no kasha. Why the Ramban didn't ask, just like he has the kasha, that the Eibusha should have told him to kasha the Kelim by Sichem Ve'eg. Same kasha, he should have told him to Tevel the Kelim after Sichem Ve'eg. It's no more kasha. But the Zelber Teretz, was he's doing Fagola, the same Teretz that we said in the Geya Kashering. What does the Ramban answer? About Mochemes Sichem Ve'eg, I feel a kedel the Chazayrish, because by Mochemes Sichem Ve'eg, they could eat treif. By Meile, they didn't have to kasha Kelim, because kasha Kelim from the fact that it absorbed treif. But then they could eat treif themselves, so they didn't have to kasha. So that same teretz is guilty of tefillah applies to why they didn't have to table it also. The Balba Mochamed Sichem Ve'eg is in Ganzen not given together from the Isur. Says like Mochamed Sichem Ve'eg there was no Isur, the food had no din of Isur. But Mafila Kadel the Chazayri Ishtalu they were allowed to eat, even the Chazayrim they were allowed to eat even today. Is a Melech cannot not given a Pshori Isur. So there is no such thing as these Kalim had a possibility of the Isur. There's no Isur. In any food that came from Sichem Ve'eg, there's no Osir. So any Kela that absorbed those foods, which was Osir, is not really Osir. Because of them come the din from Tfilah, Achshirim, and Isur. Tfilah comes to take him away from the possibility of Isur. There was no possibility of Isur before. The Gabba the Eden, there was no possibility. Why? Because there was no Isur. So the Ramban doesn't have to ask the Kasha Benegay Tfilah. He has the Kasha Benegay Agola because Agola is to get rid of the Isur. Automatically, the Kasha of Tfilah is answered. If Tfilah is also in order to get rid, not of the actual Isur, but of the potential of Isur. But if there's no Isur, so there's no reason to table. So the Taka didn't have to table the Kelim for the same reason they didn't have the Kasha. That's why the Ramban doesn't have to ask it. It's all included in the Kasha he asks in the Geya Kasha. Mechiras Chometz, why for Chometz we don't have to table the Kelim? Even though you sell the Chometz, and we do sell the Kelim Chamutzim, the Chometz Kelim zum Goy. We even give him the keys. We don't give all the keys, but some keys. But the Goy has the keys, and he has a right to come in there. So he has a right to come in and take his kelim, because he bought them. But the way it's sold is in such a way that we know from beginning, that after Pesach, it will come back to the Eid. It's not comment at all. The Goy should actually use the chametz that was sold to him and the kelim. In order for the sixth, the Rebbe says we have a klal Teda. Leib talks away. It's the majority. We always go after the majority. And if according to the mayor, if it's a big majority, we don't look at the minority. So the majority of cases, the very much majority of cases, the goyim have nothing to do with the kelim. They never, even though they bought it. Some say that the wholesaling of the chametz is not a real sale. So according to those, so it's only like a trying to trick for some reason because you're mavatal. Anyway, so it's not a real sale. So Chametz, it helps for whatever reason. So according to them, certainly that the goy has no real ownership over it. But that's not the point. That's like in brackets. The main thing is he has ownership. And according to the Alter Rebbe, it's a real sale. But it's ownership of the kelim in such a way that he will never use it. So the potential of him using it is so far-fetched, and therefore there's no reason to table it. We bald the mechira is in Aifen. At the goy hot need the efshoris and it's in the kelim. Since it's sold such a way that the goy has no possibility, even the halachically he could, but technically speaking, he doesn't have this possibility. The ribet after said it can feel a lachshirim and isa. Therefore, you don't have to table it in order to take away the possibility it had before a visa, and now it doesn't have the possibility, and you have to table it. You don't have to table it because it never had a possibility. Now, according to this, what is the sword of the native Yehuda and some Sefer? They say that we do have to table the kelim. So the Rebbe in order 48 says that you could say that the reason they say it because they hold that after all, the goy has a right to take the kelim if he wants to. And al potato, you have to let him into the house and he's able to take it. So that is, in other words, the Rebbe wants to say that even they hold that the reason for tefillah kelim because the possibility of these. What they don't hold is that because the way we sell it, the goy for sure won't use it is enough. It's considered no possibility. They say that this cause a possibility. But what we say is that itself is called no possibility for the guy to use it, practically speaking. The mail and the whole thing why you have to table because it had a possibility potential of treif. Now it doesn't have the potential, therefore not and now it has no potential. That's why you have to table it, but not by the case of chametz. In the fall when the goy that he had used in the chametz. And what according to this word, the Rebbe said, what happens if the goy for some odd reason will come in and use one of the kelim that he bought? Demelt wollen sie haben sich nicht nur dem Chiyuv Tvila, nor eben Chiyuv Nagola. First of all, you have to kasher it, sure. But you have to be table it. We don't table it because normally the guy didn't even try to use it. He has no potential. But if the guy would use it, the Rebbe says it's for it. You probably would have to table it. But in the order of 49, the Rebbe said, even you could say that even if the guy did use it, you don't have to table it because the Tfilas Kalim Chidushim, the fact you have to table Kalim is a Chidush because we see not by all Kalim. If the reason is because it went from a guy to a Kedushas Yisrael, you should table Klecheres, earthenware, everything. So we see that's a din chidush. Because you don't see by certain kelim you don't have to do it. So maybe we'd say that maybe the din is not that wherever it's mafurish that you have to table, wherever it's not mafurish, you wouldn't have to table. In other words, even if the guy would use it as a yetzem in a as an exception, maybe also wouldn't have to table it. And if you say that, we don't have to make something new and say that there's a machlekes in what we said before. So you don't have to say according to that the reason you don't have to table it because some achreinim hold because you didn't really sell it. No, you could say you did really sell it, and nevertheless you don't have to. You sold it, but you don't have to table it for the reason we said before because there's no afshorius. If there was no afshorius, no possibility for the guy to use it. So we have to look into it. It's not for now the hemshech of the first part of this halacha with the second part, but that's not for now. And the third question that we asked, how could they eat milchiks and shvuos then when they didn't table the kalim? So the answer is partial. You get it, as we said before, is I'm eating parmat and terik when up you eat basar b'cholov. The fact that it was basar b'cholov, it wasn't. Because as I said before, they knew that it's not right, so they had two sets of kalim, so they didn't mix it. The mele is not nor as a klecholov on the pale and katkin bli sister. So not only that their kalim, the milchik kalim, did not have a taste in the walls of meat that should need kashering. Not only that, no nochmer, she's nigivenken nafshoris of them. Before Matan Torah, there was no possibility that the kela should absorb. Why? Because they separated milk inflation. So in that prat, they were just like we say by a yid now. When the kela is by a yid, there's no possibility of mixing, of the having it absorbed treif. So the yidden before Matan Torah, even though they didn't have a chiyuv, but they for sure were careful basar b'cholov, so there was no possibility for a milchik kela to become treif. In the Riberham, the kelim from cholov nit getaf table sein. That's why the milchik kelim didn't have to be table. So by the kelim, the shaychas deinya from machshirim anisa. By these kelim, there's no such thing as to make it ready from the isa for the potential isa, because there was no potential isa. They did not mix basar b'cholov, and that's it. So there was no way that this would become treif. And if there's no pregnant, this would become treif, that they should use it for treif. Not that it should become, things could happen, but it's no potential that they would use it for treif. Therefore, they could eat it without tabling.